Hello, my name is Patrick Usher, and this is a video for those who are new to the channel or the project that I'm trying to put forward. And it's just to talk briefly about my book, which was released in April. Its title is POTS, What It Really Is and Why It Happens. And it comes from my, having had POTS myself, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, and having recovered by following the limbic system rehabilitation program that is the dynamic neural retraining system. And then having recovered using that program, trying to ask myself, had I recovered just because of a placebo effect, or had I recovered because the dynamic neural retraining system was in fact pointing to the root cause of POTS? And I believe that it is the latter. And I read a lot of the research into POTS, and I tried to take the main theories and ideas from the dynamic neural retraining system, which talks about the idea of limbic system impairment, which in POTS language is autonomic nervous system impairment, which we know that POTS is. We know it is a dysautonomia. And sort of taking the idea of limbic system impairment and placing it in the context of pre-existing research to see if it could explain pre-existing research. And I believe that it absolutely can explain the most important pre-existing findings into POTS to date. So the book is the result of that. It's where I set out all of my ideas in their most consistent and hopefully logical format. And having said that, every single idea that's in this book is on this channel in some form or other. I have an hour-long talk which summarizes some of the main arguments in this book, the most important arguments in this book, which you will find if you go to click on my channel, and you'll find on the main page that I have a special section on the new hypothesis that I'm putting forward. It's an hour-long talk, and that contains all the main arguments. All the other videos I do, many of them touch on other elements of this book, and other videos talk about things that aren't in the book and add to the book. And this is very important because when I started out in this project, I really wanted these ideas to be freely available. The book is there to catalogue all of them, to put them in the most coherent format, but I also wanted to ensure that basically, if someone was coming across these ideas, they would be able to access and think about all of them without having to part with any money, even if it's only kind of enough for a latte or an Americano in Starbucks. But I just wanted to ensure that because I believe very passionately that in medical matters, in terms, especially when you're talking about hypotheses and things that should be considered on a wide level and which impact a lot of people potentially, it should be freely available. It's a very important principle which I believe in. So you don't have to get the book. Everything's on this channel, is my point. However, if you do, then that's great. And I hope that you find it a helpful book, that it gives you confidence if you choose to go ahead and purchase the Dynamic Neural Retraining System DVDs or go to their in-person program, that this book, my hope is that it acts as a guide for those with POTS who are going to use the DNRS program. Because the DNRS program was developed before it was known that it would work for POTS, right? So that's kind of been incidental. But so it's not obviously geared at this very moment in time towards POTS in terms of the DVDs that you get. Now the main practice is the same, and you can also get coaching support to tailor it specifically to POTS and so on. But I hope that this book will show you why I think it works, what to expect in recovery, how long will recovery take for someone with POTS as opposed to someone with chemical sensitivity, and questions like that. So I'll just briefly mention what sort of the layout of the book. In the first chapter, Where We Are Now, I discuss the most important and salient pre-existing findings into POTS syndrome. And they are the deconditioning theory and the norepinephrine reuptake transporter protein deficiency theory. And I discuss both of those as well as sort of general points about POTS and general ideas, including the fact that it's well known that a traumatic event tends to trigger it and things like that. So so the first chapter is a kind of summary of the most important aspects of pre-existing research into POTS. The second chapter, what is really going on in POTS and why it happens, tries to situate the idea of a physical impairment to the limbic system, to the autonomic nervous system, into what I talked about in the first chapter, and tries to explain the most important findings by reference to this idea, and I believe that it absolutely can do that. So I bring in the brain a link to sort of complete chapter 1, and basically chapter 1 and chapter 2 are summarized in the hour-long talk on this channel. That's basically chapter 1 and chapter 2. Chapter 3, explaining the whole elephant. I have this elephant analogy that I like to use. I'll explain it in a second. In brackets, or how limbic system malfunction can explain everything we know about POTS. So the elephant idea, this is something that Professor Satish Raj, University of Calgary, he works on dysautonomia and POTS, one of the most prominent researchers who's done great work into POTS. He has this analogy that he uses, which is actually originally drawn from Buddhist or Hindu, ancient Buddhist or Hindu scriptures. I think both, actually. I think it was a very common analogy that was used. But of the blind men who are touching different parts of an elephant, and because they're blind or blindfolded, depending on the story, they don't know what it is they're actually touching. So they're like, is this a spear? Is this a fan? Is this a chair? They don't know because they can't see the fact that actually they've got an elephant in front of them. And Professor Satish Raj compares a lot of research into POTS as being very much sort of like this. Is it blood vessel dysfunction? Is it cardiac deconditioning? Is it net protein deficiency? Is it mast cell activation problems? Is it renin-angiotensin-aldosterone problems? What is it? And that we may actually, in focusing on honing in on smaller things that we found in POTS, although they're all incredibly useful to know about and they absolutely point to really important things we need to know, we may be missing the bigger overall picture. And that's very much an argument that runs throughout my book, is that we are missing the whole elephant of POTS, to put it that way. So in chapter 3, explaining the whole elephant, I talk about a lot of other aspects of POTS research and how limbic system impairment can also explain them, such as mast cell activation problems, such as low blood volume in POTS as caused by renin-angiotensin-aldosterone network problems. And also other overlapping conditions like fibromyalgia, multiple chemical sensitivity, chronic fatigue syndrome, irritable bowel syndrome. All of these other conditions which people with POTS also tend to have, or at least some of them, are also, I believe, limbic system impairments. So that's chapter 3. Chapter 4 is rewiring the limbic system and a biological hypothesis for recovery. So when we come to chapter 4, what I do is I outline the dynamic neural retraining system, its development, its methodologies, how it originally worked for multiple chemical sensitivity and then came to be found to work for POTS. And so I talk about the background of that. I talk about why I think the program works for POTS. I don't talk about what's in the program because I can't do that, obviously. It's copyright of the DNRS, so I don't discuss that. But I do discuss why I think it works and the methodologies in a kind of broad way, and as in a general way, not as in Hollywood. And that was awful. Anyway, and then the biological hypothesis for recovery, and then I talk about why is it that rewiring the limbic system should lead to recovery from POTS, and how is it that not only can the autonomic nervous system be lifted out of crisis when you do the brain rewiring program, but how all these other problems that have been identified in research, the mast cell activation problems, the blood vessel dysfunction problems due to net protein deficiency, the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone network problems, etc., why should they all heal up as well once you rewire the brain? So that's chapter 4. And then chapter 5, a potential protocol for recovery and outline of a trial to test this hypothesis. So in chapter 5, I kind of think more laterally about what kind of protocol would you need to have to to implement, to test these ideas, to prove whether POTS is limbic system related or not. Okay, and I outlined that. I have like 2 phases in what I suggest, and of course, anyone who ever might do this and could adapt that as they see fit. But basically, I have a kind of phase 1 for 6 months, which is brain rewiring, and then a phase 2 for another 6 months, which is more targeted cardiovascular reconditioning. And then I talk about what tests a trial would need to make in order to prove or disprove the thesis I'm putting forward. And they will be, fairly straightforward, in terms of what you'd be measuring before and after. And it would be definitely able to show one way or t'other whether it was correct. And then the book finishes off with a little kind of addendum, just some general points, sort of FAQ about recovery and the DNRS program. So that's the book. It is out. You can get it in Kindle. You can get it in paperback. If you read it and you've had a time to reflect on the ideas, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the book. There's been some reviews online and so on, which I've been grateful to read, and I've also been getting messages from people who've read the book, and I know some people have started doing the DNRS program as a result of reading the book. I love hearing from people who've read the book. So please, pop a message either down below here, or I have an email address you can write to, which is listed at the start of the book. At the end of the introduction, what POTS really is at iCloud.com. So you can also write to me that way. So that's what I want to say about the book. If you haven't got it, I really recommend that you consider getting it, especially if you're planning on following the DNRS program to recover from POTS, because it is written to be a guide, to give you hope and confidence that what you're doing is not going to work because of placebo. It's going to work because it's targeting the root cause, which is limbic system impairment. Thank you.